A number of years ago, one of my colleagues commissioned my oldest son, Carl, to paint a portrait of St. Francis and gave him complete carte blanche control of the project. I knew that was a mistake. And when I saw the portrait, I was right, and I knew it would not be received. Instead of St. Francis in flowing robes surrounded by birds and animals, St. Francis was depicted in 20th century revolutionary garb. And instead of the stigmata or the marks of Christ that normally appear on portraits of St. Francis that are just barely pinpricks or at best nail holes in the skin, the entire palms of this St. Francis were blown away so that one could see straight through them. I was right. It was refused. And so from that time on, it has resided in my meditation room, where it greets me every morning. And over the years, it has caused me to think about Francis and particularly the marks of Christ. And this particular week, it was interesting in the juxtaposition of the gospel that is assigned for this Sunday after Easter each year. It is the story of Easter evening from John's Gospel. The disciples are huddled in the upper room for fear that they will be next. The doors are barred and locked, and yet Jesus comes among them. Shalom, y'all, he says. Peace be with you. And with that, he shows them his hands and his feet and his side. Now, Thomas wasn't there. And when they tell him the news that they had seen the risen Christ, he said, "Until I put my finger in those nail holes, I'm not going to believe." Hence, doubting Thomas. A week later, Jesus shows up again in the same manner. Shalom, y'all. Peace be with you. And then he invites Thomas to do exactly what Thomas wants to do, to put his fingers in the nail holes. And Thomas instead replies, "My Lord and my God." In John's Gospel, this is the equivalent of the centurion's declaration at the foot of the cross. This truly was the Son of God. It's the only place in John's Gospel that anybody gets it right. It is because he has seen the marks of Christ that he now sees clearly the risen Christ. And I think in some sense that's exactly what Carl captured in his portrait of St. Francis. That it is through the marks of Christ that we see ourselves and the world in a new way. And because in Carl's portrait you can see through the hands, that becomes a very powerful visual image. The marks of Christ, rather than an entering into his suffering and death, are an invitation to enter into healing. For the brokenness within ourselves, the brokenness we share with others, the brokenness of this world. This year, we are gearing up for perhaps one of the most divisive presidential elections we've seen in decades. And many are afraid of what it means for us as a country. We don't have to go looking for brokenness. It is all around us. But how do we see past that to that sense of healing that Christ promises in the midst of that brokenness, or through that brokenness, if you would? I celebrated the life of one of Grace's saints yesterday. She was a remarkable woman. She had that uncanny ability to see the world through the hands of Christ, and to see in her own life that participation in that healing work. She saw need, and where she saw need, she entered in and tackled it, and invited others to share in that ministry, that work. She was an advocate, an instigator. You loved her and hated her at the same time, because she was going to get things done, and it wasn't always pretty. She advocated for medical care for the economically depressed. She created an agency to deal with domestic violence. She sent hundreds of quilts to Lutheran World Relief. Her ministry was always pushing boundaries. She was getting ready to tackle the immigration issue at the time of her death. She could do that because she saw what she did as an extension of what Christ began. That reconciliation, that healing of the nations, of the world, and of ourselves. Christ's wounds are an invitation to see the world differently and to enter into that healing. That his hands become our hands, and our feet, and our lips, and our ears, and our eyes. And what happens in that is that, like Thomas, we more clearly get it. We more clearly understand who Jesus is. The one who has come to give us grace upon grace, that we might have life, wholeness, shalom, peace, and have it abundantly.